Welcome to the Meez podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experiences you could trace like a stencil.
My guest today is the badass entrepreneur, chef, activist, author, public speaker, former labor and community organizer, and to top it off, after my own heart, damn good poker player, Reem Assil. Her upbringing as a Palestinian Syrian has informed so much of what she does today. She's the founder of Reem's California, a restaurant in the Bay Area. She's the author of the recently published book, Arabiyya. She's been nominated for a James Beard Award and won countless other awards, including Rising Star Chef and Top 10 New Restaurants in America from Food and Wine. We had such a blast today. We talked about starting restaurants, building culture, how poker influences decision-making, what we learned from parenting, and why Arab hospitality is akin to sweet torture in the best way imaginable. I hope you enjoy the conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Meez is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmeez.com. Reem, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I am so friggin' excited to have you here. There's a lot we can talk about, but we were just talking about this, so I'm going to jump in with something not food related so much, but poker, because we both share a love of poker, which I didn't know till recently.
Yes, we do.
You know, I've always been fascinated with the decision making of poker, and I feel like there's this microcosm between making decisions at the poker table and the way that people perceive how we make decisions in business. And they just see like, yes, no, I did this, or I spent this much or this little, or I decided to do this thing at this time. And we know that there's so much more that goes into that. And that's why I love poker so much. You know, there's what's your position? What's your chip stack? What are the implied odds? What's the expected value? How are the behavior of the people around you? How do you feel today? All that stuff goes into the decision that you make. And I'm curious, one, why do you love the game? And how does poker impact the way that you make decisions in your business?
Yeah, well, I guess I got into the game during a transition moment in my life where I was having existential crises of who I was. And I think poker really levels the playing field between
Yep.
everybody, right? Like it's a game of wits, and if whoever does the studying can master the game, it's like one of those games that are easy to learn but takes a lifetime to master, which is my approach to life. I just love being a student, so I just became really obsessed. And I think being at the poker table, I was able to be someone who I wasn't in real life. I was really timid. I was afraid of taking chance. I was afraid of asserting, my value. And you get to be this alter ego where you can kind of go for it at the poker table. And so as I played more poker in my real life, I became more confident. So I think there was something about that sort of meta psychological piece. It's kind of like meditation because you have to make hard decisions all the time. So how do you
Yeah.
do them from a grounded space and not be
Yep.
emotional, or as we like to call it in the poker world, go on tilt, which I've done many times. But yeah, I think that it really does translate a lot to the way that I approach life, but particularly the enterprise of Reams, because it's like practicing the muscle of, controlling emotion. And that just takes practice. You're not going to have it right off the bat. But I think the biggest lesson that I learned from poker is how not to get caught up with the upswings or the downswings. It's the long term that like life has variance. There are inevitable ups and downs and circumstances you can't control. You have to make decisions with imperfect information. You're never going to have all the information unless, of course, you're cheating. You can't really cheat at life, right?
Yep.
And yeah, you have to not get too attached to the ups and not get too attached to the downs and kind of play the long game. So that's always how I've viewed my business when I'm getting accolades and all these things. I don't attach my value to that because I know that there's going to be a downswing there, right? So I have to state what is my goal, right? My goal is to win all the chips, whatever the goal is, right? My goal for Reams is to create an enterprise that is long lasting, where workers are happy. So I go back to that center and, I try when the downswings happen not to get too caught up in like it's something that I did, right? That's just
Yeah.
short term variance. And in the long run, if I'm making good optimal decisions with all the information I have, then it should work itself out. It's just about the longevity. And I always joke, poker folks would really appreciate this, that I'm like really good at being a short stack ninja. I actually thrive in playing in the short stack with the limited resources because you have more grit, you have leverage there, whereas sometimes people with the abundance of chips kind of blow them. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really good at playing that long game, even when I'm dwindled down to a short stack. Sometimes even better.
Those are the hardest decisions to make, are the right ones,
Hmm.
in the short term,
Right.
the right long term. And I'm the opposite. I like being, I'd much prefer playing big stack poker.
Well, that's where your skill comes in, right? Like, I think
Hmm.
that I built the grit, and now as I'm kind of amassing my chips, trying to
Yeah.
figure out what's the utility of them, right?
Yep. We're going to weave that in a little bit today with your chip stack and when we talk about fundraising. But we'll jump around a little bit because I was just so fascinated to dig into learning more about you. And we've met a couple times at a couple events,
Yeah.
like indie chef events, but just so fascinated, honestly, like Reem, like generally inspired to hear how you have gone about building your business and also just having the courage to do what you're doing.
Thank you.
We're going to talk a little about that. In digging, I read somewhere it seems like the word chef is almost like a dirty word to you. It's interesting. My background is in fine dining, and I think we have this cognitive bias as chefs of like what it means to be a chef. And, ultimately our job as a chef is to make people happy and to like give them respite. And
Hmm.
sometimes I feel like, all the technique in the world and all the experience, however many restaurants you've worked at, comes second to your ability and the courage to tell a story through your food that makes people feel something. And that's what I think of when I think of you. And I feel like that is sort of redefining what a chef is today, because obviously now you're seeing chefs that aren't coming from spending 15 years in the brigade and then working their way up, and maybe you don't have to do that. So how do you view the notion of being a chef, and do you think that the paradigm is shifting?
Yeah, I always joke some of the most famous chefs out there now are TikTok chefs. And that's cool too. There's a space for everybody. It's funny because, I had written this piece in, I think, early last year. And it was after a lot of these exposés came out on, chefs that are brown and look like me and probably weren't afforded the same opportunities. And yet they
Yeah.
were still abusing their power. And so
Mm-hmm.
I went down the rabbit hole of like why. And even when they were kind of approach for accountability, they didn't know they did anything wrong. And I said, well, there's
Yeah.
something seriously wrong with that if you're in denial. So it doesn't matter who the chef is. The very setup of the chef being central to everything, the one that is the magic creator, where everybody else is invisibilized around them, is the problem in and of itself. I don't have a problem with the word in and of itself. I call myself a chef just objectively speaking, right? That's the profession. Anybody who is cooking for a living and creating things, I don't know what else you would call it, right? But this idea of, chef as where everything stops,
Yeah.
that's the problem that I have because it creates this false paradigm that people are aspiring to where they're falling into these same abuses of power, myself included, right? Like nobody is immune from that. So, the point that I was making in that article, which became so polarizing. I mean, people feel very, very, sensitive about this title. You know, if we got rid of that word, if we got rid of that as an aspiration, what else could become in our kitchens? And that's simply what I was grappling with. I don't think it's a dirty word, but when you say the word chef, you're mostly going to associate it with, the main character in the menu. You're not
Yeah.
associating it with people like me. So why do I need to fit into that mold to prove myself to be like the very thing that I'm trying to get rid of, right?
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. It's almost like more about the connotation of the word than anything else.
Yes. Yeah. And the idea of aspiring to it, you know?
Yeah, and it's sad actually. I think that it almost has a connotation of to be a chef also means to have bad leadership skills in some way, because
Right.
like the old way of doing things is just yelling and saying this isn't the right way, and and making people feel like shit sometimes, and
Yeah.
just that way of management. We didn't know any better, or maybe we did, we just didn't try. But
Yeah.
I think we have a similar outlook. Like the onus is on us to set them up for success, to be explicit, and to make them feel like they're a part of it. And
Hmm.
I learned this lesson really early on from the founders of Blue Ribbon Restaurants, Eric and Bruce. And I remember like very early on before I opened my first restaurant, they said the most important thing to be successful is to set your team up for success. And it's
Hmm.
so counterintuitive. Then I went and worked for, Boulé, where like
Hmm.
you're not told how to do anything and everything is
Yeah.
wrong and it doesn't matter what happens. So
Yeah.
like I'm curious, how do you operationalize that in your kitchens, right? How do you set your team up for success and how do you maintain consistency?
It's so funny, like when the Bear series came out and, the main character is like calling everyone chef. Like we do that. I'm like, oh, Reams has been doing that forever. That's like the thing that we do. Everybody's commanded with respect. So I think there's something about the way that just common everyday communication, seeing people as people, whole people outside of the restaurant, I think gains that trust. And honestly, there are people in my kitchen who've worked in the industry way longer than I have and have wisdom in technical areas that I don't have. And if I don't ask questions, my food isn't going to get better. So it's really kind of benefited me. Like you said, it's like if you set everybody else up for success, you don't have to do much, other than delegate and motivate and help support when there's troubleshooting needed. So that's kind of always how I approach. Like if something happened wrong, then we work backwards to figure out what made it. And usually, almost 100% of the time, there's just a breakdown in communication. There's a tool that wasn't there. Somebody is having a bad day and they just needed to take a break. There's always a reason that's like not so personal. It's more
Yeah.
systemic. And so the more that I do that with folks, the easier they're able to solve their problems on their own because they just develop those habits. Yeah. So asking a lot of questions about why they do things. And this happens all the time, right? And I'm not working on the line all the time, but like a line cook changes the setup. I'm like, why'd you do it? And then they feel like they're in trouble. I'm like, no, no, I'm not asking. I'm just curious what your thinking was. And sometimes it's like, okay, I
Yeah.
need to push back, but at least it's a conversation. I'm not telling you what to do or whatnot. If this works for you, but try this on. So it's a back and forth so people feel like their voices are heard. And then also, I want people to see themselves reflected in my food. Even though we do Arab cuisine, we're very much in mixed neighborhoods in my restaurants. And we are in California. And there are things in my culture that remind my cooks of their own culture. So they add their own little spin on that. And it's really fun. So I let them have pieces of themselves on the menu too. And I think that motivates them. Some people are motivated by creativity, some people are motivated by other things. It's like just figuring out who in your kitchen, what motivates them, and how to use that.
Yeah.
Some people love structure, so we build structure. Some people want a little bit more wiggle room. So
So as you're scaling, how are you sort of maintaining sort of like here's how we do things as you grow? Are there systems you're using or
it's hard. I think for Reams, we use something called the traction model. I don't know if you've heard of this. This is like when I was going from 1 to 2 locations, I asked the founder of Buy Right, Sam Moganam. It's a very famous grocery store that's like super sustainable, awesome here
yeah.
in San Francisco. And he's grown to like 5 locations and able to keep his values, which I'm like, how do you do that? And this book was the book that he recommended. And one of the things that were really cool in there is that you decide on the 5 core values of your business. And then everything that you do, even in your hiring process and your evaluating process, you evaluate and hire people against those 5 core values. So I thought that that was really ingenious because it brings the people that you want into your organization. So you don't have to do a lot of work on the front end. And then it reminds them when because we all fall off of our balance, right? Like if one of our
Yeah.
core values, just for instance, is get shit done, it literally is GSD. And there are days where we're not feeling that, So we have to remind ourselves of like, what do we need to do to
Yeah.
be able to display that core value? So that was really helpful. I think the pandemic helped. We were kind of operating really on the gerbil wheel, and when the pandemic happened, we were able to stop and like invest in our time in people that had stayed with us for so long. They had built up loyalty, but like that's not enough to keep people and to keep them
Yeah.
invested while they're with you. So we explored this idea of, Reem's, my vision, my 10-year vision was always to have it worker owned. But I think the pandemic kind of sped things up and was like, well, if your workers kind of help you build it with you, they're part of the fight, they're going to be that much more invested in the outcome. So a core of my really loyal employees embarked on an apprenticeship program. We built an apprenticeship program where they got to learn tools outside of the kitchen, like how to communicate better, how to understand the finances of a restaurant. And so now they're thinking like owners. And the hope is that once we make the transition to worker ownership, then they actually have material stake in the business. And I think that that helps.
Yeah.
Having good managers, obviously, and structures in which there's democratic participation, as we call it. Our style is really called participatory management, where we involve people in all the decisions we make. And it's very clear. This is where pretty much everything, employees are consulted. Sometimes they're notified, but it's transparent. But a lot
Yeah.
of times it's like, for example, with the health and safety of workers, when we decided to open up, that was a vote, right? We were like, we're not going
Yeah.
to open up until all of our workers feel safe. So there are certain things that we've already kind of instilled in Reams as if it's a cooperative.
Yeah.
And that just builds a culture of cooperation. But we are hiring a director of people and culture. That's like my big exciting thing that I really want to do, because it's hard for me as a business owner to play all those roles
Yeah.
for my managers.
Well, I mean, you said that as it relates to culture, you wanted to build a community and create a space for people. I'm quoting you here.
Mm,
Create a space for people of all walks of life to gather
mhm.
together, which I think is great. But how do you hire for that? How do you filter for the people that will resonate with? Or do you? Or is it more helping them to get there and just finding people that are just generally kind? Or like, how do you filter for the people that you're hiring? I mean, you're growing now, so you got to hire more people and you're going to have to promulgate this mission to more and more people. How do you do that?
I mean, some of it really has been organic, right? From our growth, that we've developed a reputation for ourselves. The people who have worked for us or still work for us are our best recruiters. In fact,
Hmm.
those are our best hires, right? As people in other people's networks. We actually have a bonus that we pay folks if you recruit someone who lasts past, I think it's 6 months. Our standards have gotten a little lower post-pandemic, but I don't know. Jokes aside, yeah, that's been a really good one, because you're not going to recruit just anyone. So a lot of our hires are people in the neighborhood, which for us is a really diverse set of people just by the neighborhoods that we're in. I mean, Oakland is one of the most densely diverse locations in the US. It's pretty clear, even like 2 or 3 weeks in, the people who don't kind of fit with the culture, they weed themselves out.
Yeah.
So we've developed a reputation. We've been very transparent about that. And so I think it attracts a certain type of person. Same
Yeah.
thing with our customer base, right? Like just by the nature of what we do and who is in that space, it's going to attract people with, more aligned values.
Yep.
But that said, it's not easy, because we also have people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, ages. We have a lot of generational gaps. A
Hmm.
lot of my back of house tends to be older and front of house younger, right? It's like, how do we get them on the
Yep.
same? There's language is another thing. One of the things we incorporated at Reams during the pandemic was this core tenet of language justice, which means that all of our meetings are simultaneously interpreted. Everybody gets to participate in the language that they feel most comfortable in. And that's really helped, right? Participation, when you can actually,
Yeah.
express
That's
yourself.
really
So
cool.
I think those have been the big learning lessons of like, how do you hold a multi-generational, multi-racial, multi-language workspace?
That is quite the experiment going on.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's working well.
Yeah. I mean, it costs money and it costs investment, but it's worth it in the long run.
That's your long-term play right there.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's folding to that aggressive guy. The next one. So you talk a lot about Arab hospitality, and by the way, I read through the whole book, Arabiyya, which is awesome. We're going to talk about
Thank
that. But
you.
what is Arab hospitality? And you have this very diverse team, but you are also sort of giving people this notion of Arab hospitality. So how do you foster that with this like
Yeah,
mixed bag of
in
all
a
these people?
non-Arab. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the beauty of Arab hospitality is it's for everybody, right? Hospitality is all of our roots before we were colonized and, pitted against one another. But if I were to describe Arab hospitality in a nutshell, it's like sweet torture.
I love
It's like,
that.
let me just give you everything that I have, make you feel abundance, even if it's the last thing that I have. I think the Arabs have really survived in the desert and everywhere they've traveled by being gracious to their friends and enemies alike, by, yeah, just being generous and yeah, I don't know, that feeling of abundance. And sometimes it's a little much, but that's when you know you've really done your job, is like stuff someone to the brim. We do it through our food. I mean, our hospitality is really through food. But one thing that I love about Arab culture that I'm pretty sure other cultures can relate to is this notion we're trying to change in the restaurant industry, that the guest is an equal player in that experience of hospitality, right? That if you refuse a drink, you're ruining the experience. You have to accept the drink. That's just like a simple example, but like
Hmm.
the idea of give and take, that's like what creates the magic. And the person giving the hospitality feels equally as nourished by nourishing someone else. And that's, I think, what attracts a lot of us to the
Yeah.
restaurant industry. But for whatever reason, it's turned into this like, we're at your service, like a service industry where we do everything at all costs for the customer. And that's definitely not the way that we do things at Reams. It's much more aligned with the Arab way of doing things, which is like, come as you are. We'll take you as
Hmm.
you are. Leave your xenophobia, of course, and your racism at the door. We are accepting, but obviously there are things that we don't stand for.
Yep.
And let us break down that barrier, and you can see us as humans, and we can engage in a very authentic way, even when it's not comfortable, right? There are moments our hospitality is a little overbearing, but
Well, that's probably when it's at its best.
yes.
Okay, so I'm going to quote you again, by the way, to ask another question. But you said that you have a responsibility to your grandmother and your ancestors and your heritage as a whole to cook the food that they could not when they were
Mm,
displaced from their land. So you have a really diverse team, and you're obviously empowering them to help build some of this food with you.
mhm.
So, how much of what you do is to sort of preserve the traditions of the culture that you come from versus evolving and adapting to this new crazy world? Call it San Francisco, call it
Mhm.
America, where you're sort of like introducing this food and this culture. How much is preserving versus sort of evolving?
I think they're not mutually exclusive, I guess is the easiest way to answer that question. It's not so simple as to say, I'm preserving the stories, not necessarily the traditions, but the traditions so much of the time tell the story, right? The story of struggle, the story of adaptation, the story of hospitality, right? Like why we approach dishes the way that we approach them. So when I think about these dishes, I think about what is the heart and soul of the dish. It's not like I'm just
Hmm.
throwing a bunch of things that inspire me on a plate, but it's like, okay, this is the like core tenet of this dish. And then how do I evolve it to be even better with the ingredients that are available to me? And I think that there's this misconception that like food is always evolving, even in its place of origin, right? I don't
Yeah.
think that the foods my grandmother was making were the foods her grandmother was. She probably adapted it when she was displaced. So like we should celebrate that and we should evolve our food because there's just so many amazing ingredients out there and ways to prolific ways, right, to create
Yeah.
those experiences. And so what I try to do is pay homage to place. And in my case, the place that I'm in is on a lonely land here in California, where we're supporting farmers who live off the land. There's a whole story to that. So
Yeah.
why not tell that story too? Like respect kind of the place that we're in While telling the story that my grandmother was a refugee in Gaza, and in Gaza now they can no longer fish. So that's a privilege that we have here. Like that's a way to tell the story in a way that feels authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like you're preserving the tradition by evolving it.
Exactly, because our tradition is really resilience, right? That's the
Yeah.
tradition, right?
Yeah. And it was constantly adapting, and because you had to migrate and there was
Yeah.
constant displacement, and that's probably what makes the food what it is.
Even better. And I mean, hopefully you got this from the book, but I'm fascinated with Arabs in diaspora in particular, because if you look at the history of how in the 1800s, 1900s, every wave of fleeing empire, right? We've organically exchanged with the
Yeah.
cultures around us, right? Whether it be here in the US or in Latin America or Europe. And there's just something really beautiful about that. Like, I love the stories of organic exchange of cultures and the building of a new culture that's just a little bit better.
Yeah. It's what's funny is like it's not funny actually, but in America we think that preserving is keeping things as the way they are, but actually the most of the world for most of history, it has been the opposite. I mean, even like thinking Genghis Khan was ruling most of this planet for a very long time, and for all the crazy things that he did, he actually brought cultures, from other places and made sure that they combined ingredients and flavors and ideas, and that's been happening for millennia.
Hmm.
That actually is more of the norm than saying, no, this is Mexican cuisine, this is Indian cuisine. No, no, no. It's like it's always evolving.
Yeah, that's a colonial construct.
Yeah, yeah, it really is.
It's a reaction to colonial because the distinction that I make when I call my food Palestinian or Levantine, or even that's a colonial construct, right? The French called the Levant, but or Lebanese or
Hmm.
Syrian, because you can't. It was all one land, and we were traversing, and but
Yep.
it's a reaction to a certain colonial construct that is trying to invisibilize our food. That's why it's important to say this is from this country. So it's in reaction to theft of land, theft of food, theft of culture, right? In order to invisibilize the people. So then that's when it becomes necessary to kind of state. But it is in essence a reactionary thing. And if we didn't have these, again, colonial constructs, we wouldn't have to do that. But that's
Yeah.
unfortunately, our food is a marker of who we are. And for Palestinians, it's probably one of the last frontiers that we have to make sure that
Yeah.
we still exist, right? When we're being literally killed off our land. So,
Well, I think you're at least chipping away at that a little bit with what you're doing.
yeah,
There's a quote I love from Henry Matisse. It's like literally 3 words. Creativity takes courage. And, I think that's what you're doing and that's what your ancestor did. And so you have to keep adapting as you get put in these situations. So I think that story is coming through with what you're doing at Reams.
trying. So the underdog.
Yeah, I'd rather be the underdog and,
Totally.
and surprise people.
Yes.
So what's next? I know we talked a little bit about some fundraising. So how's your chip stack?
Yeah.
What are you working on next?
Chip stack is dwindling for some building. Hopefully, I'll get it back in the next pot. Yeah, so we just signed a lease on a location that we'll be kind of announcing to the world. And this is going to be basically my original vision of Reams, which was this big one stop shop bakery cafe where people can get their daily bread, and big catering operation in the heart of downtown Oakland, where we opened our first brick and mortar. And we're so excited to build that. And that will be kind of the house of the heartbeat, as we call it. And the idea for the growth of Reams is to really, get our breads into as many hands and homes as possible. So, the restaurant model we knew even before the pandemic is not sustainable in and of itself. So we want to create multiple revenue streams, which we've learned over the years how to do, to be able to allow our food spaces, the cafe and the restaurant, just to be a community asset and not to have to rely
Yeah.
on that to build wealth for our workers and to build wealth in these other areas that can scale. So that's kind of the trajectory. We're raising money for that. We're trying to hire an infrastructure so that, as we grow, we're growing thoughtfully. So getting some high level folks who have background in CPG, consumer packaged goods, and cultivating, operationalizing, codifying all of the amazing things that we've done around people on a larger scale, and hopefully coming up with a toolkit for other restaurants to follow around how you can transition into worker ownership. I think a lot of owners out there, I want an exit plan, but I want this legacy to stay. How do
Yeah.
I do that without selling my soul? And they'll either fold their restaurants or sell it to someone that doesn't quite understand.
It's tough to find an exit strategy for a restaurant.
Yeah, so this is a wonderful exit strategy of like how do you build your employees to carry on your legacy, and
Mhm.
how do you codify that in an operating agreement so it builds wealth for generations to
Yeah.
come, and you don't have to be in the trenches. That's what I'm working on now. We're raising money for all of that, the kind of worker transition, the building of the flagship, and
It's amazing.
building of this infrastructure. So I'm really excited to eventually be back in Oakland and have this beautiful one-stop shop, right? Where you walk in and there's just like hundreds of workers around you doing their thing.
Oh, that's so cool. So it's like the Willy Wonka of bread.
Of bread, yeah, it's like pita lines and the smell of za'atar as you walk in the door, like all of
Oh
that.
my God. Yeah. Are you gonna make your own Lebanese there too? Or did they use Lebanese in Palestinian cuisine?
Yeah, well, we do at the restaurant. We'll focus on the bread, and you can get the dips at the restaurant. Yeah, and then I'm, preaching the gospel of Arab hospitality, still trying to push the envelope of what Arab cuisine can be in this country, and keeping this cookbook tour going for folks who haven't seen
Yeah.
or read Arabiyya. Like, I just think that book is it's intersectional, right? Like anybody can relate
Yeah.
to it, even though the stories are very unique to my story.
Yeah.
My hope is that there's some things that resonate with anyone, right?
Yeah. For me, it was obviously way more than a cookbook because there's just a great story in it.
Yeah.
You said, I'm quoting you a lot today, so I hope that's okay. You said Arabia was kind of a love letter to your family, to your people, to yourself.
Yeah.
So how was it received? And how has has it been cathartic for you now that it's published and it's out there?
Yeah. It has brought me the greatest joy. It's been really vulnerable, but it did exactly what I wanted to do, which is to build my community far bigger and more expansive than I ever thought it could be. Last year, I went to places like Texas and Charleston and met Arabs in diaspora everywhere, and second, third
Wow.
generation. And that is the beauty. It's like taking all these folks who felt invisibilized, and they finally feel seen, and that's been really amazing to connect with folks across the country and hear their stories.
Did they take you to any great spots when you were there? Any local?
Arab spots? No, I mean, I didn't
Yeah.
have time. Usually I was there doing an event in and out,
Yeah.
but I think that synergy has been great. And then, I mean, people I didn't imagine were going to be so touched by the book, like burly white men from Texas who like stops me in a barbecue event, and he's like, Reem Assil, I just want to tell you how touching that book. Just like you'd never know who your audience is, and
Yeah.
how it touches people, and like who your fans are. So that was very touching to me, is to like understand that there's like a universality of human experience, that anybody could really be touched by this book. So I loved that part, and yeah, I think it's been well received. I think it's doing well. I'm gonna keep this cookbook tour going this year. I had a really good run last year and I took a little break. And, one of the things that I really want is for people who are not from my cuisine, who have restaurants that are not Arab, to take the book and like adapt it to their own culture. So, like last year, we did like an Arab izakaya with Chef Soma. I'm not sure if you met Chef Soma from Indie Chefs. She has like
Yeah. Yeah. I think through the tour I did.
komonegi, and we were like, oh my god, the Japanese and the Arabs share no ingredients, but we share the same traditions of like, small bites, and just like figuring out ways that so like look like my food but with like Japanese flavors, and it was amazing. We did a jalapeno pop-up with Magna Casina in Portland, and so I want to do more of that, like the melding of
Wow.
other people's cultures with Arab
Yeah.
cuisine, and what we can create from that.
I think you and I were just talking about this. You were in Mexico recently.
Yeah, we did a Mexipali.
Yeah, there's a ton of parallels there.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, there's also just a huge Arab influence in Mexico, but do you see a lot of parallels between the cuisine in
Oh my
Mexico and?
God. Mexico feels like home. I could close my eyes and feel like I'm in Beirut. Yeah, I mean, the Arab culture is very vibrant there. I think from the influx of the Lebanese that came
Yeah,
in the 1900s, but also the touch of the Moors on the Spaniards. I think
yeah,
there's a lot of that Arab influence. So I think that Mexico, with the like abundance of amazing ingredients, just makes our food even better.
yeah,
And that's,
yeah.
that's how
Especially.
the al pastor was adapted from shawarma and all of these things
Mm-hmm.
that are now part of Mexican cuisine. So we really
Mm-hmm.
celebrated that in that dinner. And it was cool, like
Yeah.
chapulines on Muhammara, like who would have known? That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and all the spices that they use. I was just chatting with Barca Cardoz,
Hmm.
Flory Cardoz's wife, and we were talking about Indian cuisine and
Hmm.
how this similar it is to Mexican cuisine. And actually, I think it's just like,
It's through the trade.
yeah, and there's also just so diverse. Like, obviously, like the food of Chiapas is completely different from, Sonora or from, Puebla or Oaxaca or the Yucatan. And the same is in India, like Goan food and food of Mumbai or Hyderabad are completely different. Is there other pieces of that in there?
Yeah, we're not a monolith. And yeah, I really try to show the breadth and depth of Arab cuisine when I talk about my food or do pop ups. North African cuisine is not going to be the same as cuisine in the Gulf. They don't have
Yeah,
the same things available to them to that of a Mediterranean climate where my parents are from. It's terroir, right? It's different terrain. There's also indigenous cultures. Like we forget to talk about indigenous cultures in that region, but there are the Bedouins, there are the Berbers, there are people that even pre Arab colonization that still live in these areas, the Assyrians, the Kurds, the Armenians.
yeah. Oh my
So when
gosh.
I talk about that region, that's why I say you can't just call it Middle East or you can't just clump it
Yeah,
into these things because there are different people with different eating traditions
yeah,
that get
yeah.
invisibilized in that. So
What's exciting because that's more things for you to start teasing
to
out.
dig, exactly. Because I'm a forever student, just like I told you. Easy
Yep.
to learn, lifetime to master.
It's usually the last 0.5% that matters the most too. So
Yes.
so cookbooks are pretty static, once they're published, kind of that's it. They're out there. There's nothing you can change. So now that it's out there, is there anything that you wish you could sort of add on or change or tweak, given you can't?
Truth be told, I submitted double what I was contracted for in terms of words. And they were like,
Wow.
we just needed 40,000. I'm like, well, I had a lot to say. Like, I can't trim this down. And 10 Speed really went to bat to like get this book
Yeah.
published the way I wanted. I mean, we had to cut so much out. We went from 90,000 to 80,000 words, and that was hard for me because really what I wanted to do was tell my story. And the way we say the breadth and depth of Arab cuisine, the breadth and depth of Reem too, like that I
Mm-hmm.
evolved. And, I wrote this book. I mean, it's called Arabiyya, which means Arab woman in Arabic. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to reclaim, it was like a reclamation of my identity that I had felt like the media was kind of like shaping me into this like superstar chef. And it's not really what the
Yeah.
reality is, right? So, I wish I could have delved deeper into some of those issues. Maybe I'll write a memoir one day. We ended the book at the opening of my first restaurant. We had to do an epilogue about how I opened and walked away from a fine dining restaurant. All of those things just
Yeah.
kind of stuffed into an epilogue. So
That was with Daniel Patterson, right?
yeah, so I think that there are more opportunities to write more in depth about some of the issues I covered in the
Yeah.
book. But I'm proud of this book. I think it's a snapshot of who I am in this period of my life, and who knows what the
Yeah.
next 10 years are going to be for me. But my original concept was to look externally also of like other people that have this story and compare and contrast. So that's like if I were to write another book, or I'm working on a few creative projects where hopefully we can bring that to light to show that even Arabs in the US, we're not like the poor refugee or the middle class, assimilated family. There's just so much in between. And
Yeah.
I would like to be part of the pioneers that help kind of break that down for people.
Well, I'm sure you can. I feel like it's analogous to, I don't know if you know the author Yuval Noah Harari, but for some reason I thought about his first book and then his next book. And like maybe your first book is reclaiming the Arab woman, and your next book is the future of Arab women.
Exactly, exactly. And I'm still exploring that. Yeah.
Yeah. Any current mentors or people that inspire you?
Hmm. Yeah, it's always hard when I get that question because I just feel like everybody in my life inspires me in a certain way. I feel like just like a lot of the women who work for me, I feel inspired by them every day because I'm like a single mom and carrying all these things. And I'm like, how do people do this? And seeing some of the women I work with do that day in and day out
Yeah.
is pretty amazing. I just signed on with Hone, which is a talent wing of Whetstone Media, and Steven Satterfield has been a really big inspiration to me, like what he's been able to do and carve. So I really look
Mm-hmm.
to people like that in the industry. Yeah, just people who are doing both the creative and, the
Yeah.
on the ground work to spread their resources to people. I think are inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. You're a mom and a business owner. I have 2 kids, so I can certainly attest to it is fucking hard to
It's
be a
brutal.
parent and run a business. And my kids inspire me every day. I'm like, I get surprised about things, but what has being a mom taught you, or what has Zane taught you about anything, business, life, what you're doing,
Nothing really
except how to
matters.
like stay up later? And
What has he taught me? I mean, I think the letting go of control,
Mhm.
that has been something that I'm still learning. But like these power struggles that happen with kids is just so interesting how that learned behavior
Yeah.
and kids are so powerless. Like, why are we struggling for power with them? I've been reading Bell Hooks All About Love, which I highly
Hmm.
recommend to people. I read it every once in a while, and it just talks about from the beginning, like how do we give love to our kids and what they associate with love. And so I'm really cognizant of that with my child, but I think it carries to everything that I do in terms of like, especially people who've been on the margins and have never been given any power. That like it's a
Yeah.
process, right? And I think that's taught me a lot about, I'm definitely the type that has power with, that's my style of leadership. But even when you have power with, sometimes you take up a lot of space, right? So, like, how do you let people make mistakes and learn from their mistakes? So, I'm doing a lot of that with my child.
Yep.
But it's hard because you have to
I
give up
struggle with that a lot
control.
too.
Yeah, you don't want them to learn the
Yeah.
hard way, especially at that age. But, like, sometimes
Yeah.
it's just got to be the way it's got to be, right?
Yeah. The thing about kids is like, what I've learned most of they're so innocent that,
Hmm.
and we have kids of similar age. Mine's
Yeah,
2 and 4, and yours 2, almost 4, and yours, I think you
yeah,
have a 5-year-old.
yeah,
Like everything that they're doing is because they have some feeling. When they're
yeah,
and they piss you off, and they
yeah,
like, they'll just like not put their clothes on, or they'll be an asshole.
yeah,
But you realize like obviously there's some reason behind it that
right.
they have this feeling. When you sort of apply that to people in general, like the people that work for you, the people around you, you realize everybody just has some reason why they're doing it.
Yeah,
Most likely 99.9% of the time it's not malicious, that
yeah,
they're hurting, or
they're
they're
hurting.
sad, or they're depressed, or something is behind it. And the more that I see it in my kids, and the more I sort of build that muscle of every time he does something where I'm like, dude, chill the fuck out. Instead, I'm like, no, what? Okay, why are you having a tantrum?
Yeah,
What? I wonder what you're thinking right now. It like helps me build that muscle when someone on my team maybe does something, or someone that I know does something. I'm like, you know what?
yeah,
There's probably something going on,
yeah.
and I suck at that. So
It's so funny because I'm just like, yeah, I could see how he feels. I'm like, yeah, I wish I could cry about that. Like, I feel that. Like, I feel that. And why, we're taught. I wish I could just like freaking throw a tantrum. Like, I had to make a film about it. We're taught to like suppress our feelings a little bit. And so then our feelings come out in very toxic ways when we're adults. So
yeah,
I'm like, yeah, let's cry it out. Yeah, this sucks. That's what I say. This sucks.
yep,
I know it's really hard.
yep. Showing the empathy.
Yeah, but I always, and I think this is kind of related to people you lead, is just because limits are important too. So I'm always like, what's my job? My job is to keep you safe and keep you healthy, right? So when I'm mad, it doesn't mean I don't love you. Like, yep, I'm mad at you
Yeah,
and I still love you. And it's the same. I mean, you don't have to say to your team members that you love them. It's like, I'm upset about this thing, but this is not a reflection on you as a person. I still
yeah,
respect you and you're an integral part of this team. Because people
yeah,
are afraid of rejection and that we learn that I think from our parents. At least for me, because
yeah.
my parents never gave me like I came from a culture where it's like you just perform and you never get
Same.
the positive affirmation.
Yeah,
So it's a learned behavior.
it really is. And if you don't come from it, I don't either. It's very
Yeah.
hard. It takes a lot of work to build that,
Yeah.
but that's why we're, it makes us better. So
Yeah, exactly.
I
This
think,
is a
I hope.
different generation. Yeah.
Yep. All right. I have what might sound like a dumb question, but I'm asking it to everybody now
Yeah.
because I ask myself this all the time. So you can take it for what it's worth. But if there was no construct of time and you had unlimited resources to do whatever the heck you wanted, what would you do next?
There's no construct of time. Like I could be a mom and do this thing.
Yes, exactly. Like you could be a mom. It's something that would take 100 years, could take a minute. And if it took $100 million, you have that tomorrow. What would you do?
Ooh, that's a tough one. 'Cause I'm like, I would lead the revolution to free my peoples, but that's a little much. Then that the revolution will not be televised or whatever, fundraised for. I mean, my dream was always to like grow Reams to build, worker owned spaces or models for that. I would like really launch deep into that and help restaurants convert. I always had this dream of having a za'atar farm, so doing some more like back to the roots projects that would help refugees and, folks who want to be connected to their roots learn how to live off the land or not live off, make a living, providing those ingredients to the restaurants. I'd also have my own show. Yeah, there's a lot of things that I want to do.
Well, if part of it included a Reams poker tournament, I would do
Oh
that.
yeah, we're gonna do that too. I'd be playing poker. Maybe try to take a shot at the World Series.
There you go. If you
Yeah,
had a show, what would it be? I'm gonna say when you have a show. I'm pretty sure you're gonna have one. So when
yeah,
you have a
yeah.
show.
I'm working on some things. I mean, there's one where I get to dabble with just cool people, like pop icons, where we get to like cook something but talk shit. So there are a lot of social justice type folks who are secret foodies. So for the foodie people to hear about these important issues that they're working on and help organize them through my show. And then there are foodies who are food people who are doing really awesome social justice things that, the activists in the world could get a little bit more interesting in their organizing and lighten up
Yeah,
a little bit. So it'd be like fun talking shit with both those types of people to merge those two worlds. Because I feel like I have this
yeah.
like social justice and then this
Hmm.
foodie world, and I just wish there wasn't such a dissonance because like social justice is like the trend, but it's like no, there are actually people doing on the ground organizing that is changing people's reality, and we need to
Yeah,
be doing more of that. And then a travel show where I get to go all around the world.
yeah. Well, of course that one. You gotta have that.
Yeah, yeah. I never traveled. I've been working since I was 13. The closest in 2010, before I took a hiatus, I had a whole previous career working as an organizer, labor organizer,
Mm-hmm.
a policy person, and nonprofits and whatnot.
Yep.
I took like 3 weeks and went to Lebanon and Syria. That was like my longest vacation.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but I otherwise haven't really traveled. I've never been to parts of Europe. Yeah, I just want to kind of see the world a little bit more.
Okay, we're wrapping up here. Anything you want to tell the audience, your friends, your colleagues, anybody that's gonna be listening to this crazy show that we're doing?
Feel like I said it all. Yeah, come to Reams. Come experience the warmth of Arab bread and hospitality, as we call it.
All right. Well, to sweet torture,
Yes.
I will say thank you.
Thank you.
This was awesome and really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for talking poker with me. That's another world. The world of Reams converging.
Yeah, we'll play soon for sure.
Awesome.
Thanks for tuning into the Meez podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip hop artist Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmeez.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.